The votes for this. We're going to do a much more limited bill that's going to deal a little bit with the oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico and maybe some rebates for a home weatherization. He didn't quite say it that way. I was very disappointed when he made that statement because he had been promising all along. And here's the other thing. We're in a world of polling. And every single United States nationwide poll that's been done for the last year and a half has shown the majority of Americans support putting a price on carbon and causing carbon emissions to go down over time, investing in clean energy, even if it means raising the price of energy. You know, an honest assessment, an honest poll. The majority of Americans in every poll. Am I most disappointed with Senator Harry Reid? Not really. I'm disappointed that there were no Republicans who came up to the bat and said, we need to do what the House did, and this needs to be a bipartisan or nonpartisan attempt. This is an issue that doesn't just affect Democrats and not Republicans. This affects all of us, and we need to take responsible action. So I'm disappointed at the lack of Republican leadership. But I'm perhaps most disappointed at the lack of the President's messaging and leadership on this. After all, 2008 was the first presidential campaign in which both major party candidates said climate change is real, the United States has responsibility and must greatly reduce emissions in order to lead the world in reducing emissions. And if elected, I will make these things come to pass. The President mentioned it when he was on the campaign trail in every speech. And he was very specific about it. And he has become woefully silent about it since just after his inauguration. And so we are a nation that seems to be led by media sound bites, and one of our greatest messengers has been silent pretty much on this issue for the last year or so. So where does this leave us? Do we just pack up our bags? Do I go back to St. Paul where I live and you go back to Ely or Winton or wherever you live and figure out how can I do the best possible thing with my community? Yes, we should all do that. But we also need to realize that this is a problem that means the whole economy has to change. And so more than ever, we have to re-engage with other people in figuring out how to make that happen. Here's what I think Minnesota has to offer. Minnesota, as we all know, is a state with no coal, no oil, no natural gas, so no fossil fuels. We're an extreme weather state. When I go back to St. Paul today, I think the forecast is for 94 degrees, which doesn't feel very nice to me either.
Don't go back.
There's that. But we also have very harsh winters. We have we need a lot of energy in a state that is not rich and has no conventional sources of energy, fossil fuels. But we know that we have a lot at risk. We know that the types of things that make Minnesota, Minnesota, the change of seasons, the forests, the lakes and water quality, what is left of the prairies, the rich farmland, and the major cities that are a big economic engine are a place that is subject to a lot of human health risks, because when the heat waves start to come with the warming, the places that are going to be hardest hit are going to be places where people don't have air conditioning and don't have knowledge about what to do because they've never had to deal with major heat waves before and don't have access to a lake. For those of you who do have access to a lake, that lake is not going to be as comfortable in 20 years and is going to be a lot weedier in 20 years than it is now because it's global warming. So it will be less of a refuge for us. So we know we have a lot at risk, and we've already led the country in energy efficiency. We have some of the best energy efficiency in this country, not the best, but some of the best. For a time, we had the best renewable energy requirements in the country. It took us 7 years to get them through the legislature, but now we have them. And so we know what's possible in a cold weather state. We know it's possible to go from 0 fossil fuels for to now we have 9% wind power across the state of Minnesota in just a few years. We know what is possible in this state, and we know that it brings jobs, and we know that it taps into what Minnesota is really strongest in, which is having a very well-educated, very motivated set of people who are very good at innovating. And we have a great quality of life as a result of that. And now we need to apply those skills and talents to this problem of getting to a low-carbon economy. We need to be at the forefront of this revolution in Minnesota, and we should be there. We can't be quiet about it. We can't just be talking to people like ourselves, though sometimes it's hard in this time of great rancor to talk to people who aren't like who don't have the same philosophies. And we need to figure this thing out. The set of solutions we need is literally many dozens of things, not only changes in behavior, but the sort of technologies that are going to be on the shelves of my Ace hardware store in my community at a price I can afford, in a way that I know how to install them or know how to find a set of people in my community to install them going forward. And we need to figure this out sooner rather than later, and we need to show the rest of the country how it's done. Yes. And so that's why one of the reasons I'm very happy to be here in a community that has something called E3, and that is trying to do that going forward. And I want to hear during the Q&A more about what is going on in this region, so that I can bring those stories back to my region, so that we can start sharing those stories and motivating one another going forward. But I also want to leave you with this really sticky problem. The U.S. Senate apparently is going to fail to act on this. What does that mean? It does not mean that the U.S. Senate is not acting in 2010, but after the November 2010 elections, then they'll act. I don't know if you've read the polls, but the prognostications are that the Senate gets browner, the House of Representatives gets browner, less green, less for clean energy and dealing with climate after these elections. Maybe that projection is wrong. But the White House itself has said, if this bill doesn't pass this year, it will likely be 3 to 4 more years before we even take it up again. Now, for those of us who know, remember I was going back through my notes from college, from a climatology course in college in the 1980s. We've known about this for a long time. We've taken a pass for a very long time, and many of us are very frustrated really beyond belief about this. And we need to take this on. And so it's not as if we can wait until 2012 or 2014 for the Senate to get its act together. We need to keep applying pressure to our congressional delegation and insist that for anyone who represents Minnesota, it's unacceptable not to pass clean energy and climate policies as soon as possible. That there are opportunities that are waiting to be realized in places like Ely, and places like Virginia, and places like St. Paul, for which policy matters. And so this is probably a pretty politically attuned group. And remember, I'm with a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse any candidates for office, though we do brief all the candidates for office. But I would remind everyone that if the person who represents you in Congress, or the people who represent you in the Senate, or the people who represent you in the Minnesota legislature don't know how you feel about these issues and don't know your name, they should. Seriously, they should know your name. And I also say to people, if you have already written to Senator Amy Klobuchar, or sent a letter, or called up Senator Amy Klobuchar because she serves on the Environment Committee and told her how you feel, once is not enough. They are hearing every day from hundreds of lobbyists from the oil and coal industry telling them that the status quo is good enough, don't change anything, and they need to hear from really well-informed, bright, supercharged Minnesotans from all parts of this state about what it is we expect them to do. Of course, in a friendly, respectful way. But the really good news is literally every week there's something new happening. There's new scientific information. There's new information from the military about the risk. There's a new solar hot water system going online. And so there's always